An escalation between brotherly nations alarms the world, with Iran and Pakistan launching attacks on each other's territory. Could we be witnessing another conflict brewing with global implications? Rebels in Balochistan have long been a common problem for both, but will the rest of the region now prove a dividing force? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmakers are Iran and Pakistan. Israel's assault on Gaza has raised alarms around the world, leading many to worry if and how the war could spread. Yemen's Houthis say their destabilizing attacks on vessels in the Red Sea are because of Israel's actions. And some in Iran now say it was compelled to launch an attack on a border area of Pakistan because Israel activated an anti-Iran terror group there. Well, Tehran also hit targets in Syria and Iraq, but Pakistan retaliated, firing on what it said were terrorist targets in Iran. Now, we have to hope the escalation stops here. But what's really behind this sudden exchange? And has anything been achieved through firing on their neighbors? Here's a look.
2 children were killed and 3 others were left nursing injuries after Iran fired missiles and sent drones into the Balochistan region in western Pakistan on January the 16th. Pakistan retaliated early the following day with precision strikes on what it says were terrorist hideouts, marking a new peak in cross-border tensions. This attack is the first major declared strike on Iran by a foreign power since the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s.
This morning's action was taken in light of credible intelligence of impending large-scale terrorist activities against Pakistan by these terrorists. This action is a manifestation of Pakistan's unflinching resolve to protect and defend its national security against all threats.
Operation Marg Bar Sarmachar, which loosely translates to death to guerrilla fighters, saw the deployment of advanced weaponry targeting the Balochistan Liberation Army and Front. The latest violence is causing jitters about its potential to expand in the Middle East, even as Israel's war on Gaza rages on.
We are concerned about escalating tensions in the region. It's been something, as you know, we've spoken about a number of times. It's something we've focused on. We've been incredibly concerned about the potential for escalation since October 7th, and that's why we have engaged in intense diplomatic efforts to try to prevent escalation.
But while Pakistan asserts its commitment to peace, Tehran's demand for explanations is escalating diplomatic tensions between the two nations. Pakistani authorities reported civilian casualties, including the deaths of 2 minors. In a region already navigating a complex geopolitical landscape, this latest development could be a turning point with far-reaching consequences.
So how serious are the consequences of this exchange, and will it go any further? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Baghdad, Foad Izadi, an associate professor in the Faculty of World Studies at Tehran University. From Lahore is Pakistani journalist Ejaz Haider, Giorgio Cafiero, founder and CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Thanks all so much for being with me. Giorgio, I'll start with you. And let me first ask, as an analyst, if the intensity of these attacks actually caught you by surprise, given, the mostly brotherly relationship between Iran and Pakistan, and what do you suspect is really behind it?
Thank you. Great to be on your program. Good to be with my colleagues in Baghdad and Pakistan. We know that the issues of certain non-state actors in the areas near the Iranian-Pakistani border has been a very sensitive issue in bilateral relations for many years. Iran's government has long complained about certain terrorist elements on the Pakistani side, and likewise, Pakistani officials have had serious complaints about various non-state actors on the Iranian side of the border. So it was a little bit surprising for me to see these cross-border strikes take place. But given the extent to which both governments have viewed the actions of these different non-state actors as a huge threat to the security of both countries. It was perhaps not necessarily super surprising. In terms of the intensity of the attacks, I don't think we should necessarily overstate what happened. And I think the fact that the death tolls were quite limited, and on the Iranian side, my understanding is that no Iranian nationals lost their lives. I think those factors make it quite easy to imagine the two governments being able to find some off-ramps and cool the tensions in a pretty short period of time.
Okay.
At least this is what we hope will happen.
So not totally surprising for you, but quickly, I mean, how do you think the timing of it fits into the global dynamics right now?
Well, Iran right now certainly feels threatened by a number of external forces, and the blood that has been spilled in Sistan and Balochistan in recent times, and the extent to which Iran views certain groups on the Pakistani side of the border as a huge threat to Iran's national security helps us understand why officials in Tehran felt that it was extremely important to take some very decisive action.
Okay, so Iran feeling threatened, but Foad, we have Iran now launching attacks on the territory of 3 neighbors now, Pakistan arguably being the most shocking. Is this really necessary for Iran's security?
You know, Iran is a safe country, and I think Iranian government officials want to make sure that the statement continues to be true. With regard to Pakistan, we had a terrorist attack just a few weeks ago in the city of Rask that resulted in 11 policemen getting killed by the organization that was hit a couple of days ago. In city of Kerman, we had a terrorist attack by ISIS, and the ISIS base in Idlib in Syria was attacked. And in Syria, we had Israelis assassinating a senior Iranian government official, and that's why Iran hit an Israeli intelligence building in Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. So what Iran has done is responding to attacks that have resulted in Iranian citizens getting killed, and the basic message is that don't kill Iranian citizens because you would get hit back.
But Fawad, when we hear some Iranians saying Israel is actually at fault for agitating terror groups in the Balochistan region to attack Iran, is that true? Or are some Iranians kind of trying to divert attention to Israel and maybe, in a sense, use it as a bit of a scapegoat here?
You know, it is an Israeli-American operation. It's not just the Israelis. Iranians have been able to document the connection that these terrorist organizations have with generally Western intelligence agencies. They get money from these agencies, they get intelligence from these agencies, and they are subcontractors. As you know, we have a genocide going on in Gaza. Israelis are saying that Iran is supporting Hamas, which is true. Iran is supporting Hamas. And this is a way of getting back at Iran by engaging in terrorism. Of course, what Palestinians are doing are trying to free their land. Their land is occupied.
Understood.
And that is different from terrorist organizations attacking Iranian policemen.
Okay, well, let me ask Ejaz Haider, because is that to say then that Israel is also active in more lawless parts of Pakistan, and that Pakistan doesn't necessarily have control then over those agents, in which case Iran would have the right to attack if there genuinely is terrorist outlets there that are threatening Iran? I mean, does Pakistan have any interest in groups that would undermine Iran and even work with Israel to do so?
Well, Pakistan does not recognize Israel. Pakistani policy with reference to Israel and the Gaza genocide and also what's happening in the occupied Palestinian territories is very clear. In any case, if we were to go by this argument, then Iran should probably be targeting the United States and Israel rather than Syria or Iraq or Pakistan. Let me just say one thing. While agreeing with a lot that Giorgio said, I would just say that if you look at the threat spectrum that Iran has, and this is a relative thing, given that threat spectrum, the issue of Ejaz Haider, and yes, there have been tensions simmering between Iran and Pakistan for many years now, and both sides have been complaining to each other. But given the threat spectrum, this is not a core threat for Iran. That is one point that I want to put on the table. Secondly, lumping Syria and Iraq with Iran, and this is with respect to what Professor Izadi said, that Iran has the right to respond to something that has happened, is somewhat disingenuous, not just in relation to the kind of relationship that has been developing over the last 3-4 years between Iran and Pakistan, but also because it makes no logical strategic sense for Iran to open a front in the east when it is already, loaded in terms of, various kinds of threats on its west. I also say this because over the last 2-3 years, there have been many meetings between Iranian and Pakistani officials at the mid-ranking levels also, at the highest levels also. And there have been mechanisms in place in relation to counterterrorism cooperation, as also cooperation at other levels in terms of border management. So therefore, this particular strike came as a surprise in the sense that it did not make any sense. We still actually in Pakistan asking this question of what exactly did Iran want to achieve, because there's no military gains out of this, but there was likely to be a huge diplomatic cost. And it's fortunate that both sides have basically tried to, Pakistan in terms of its retaliation, it was measured. Pakistan began with non-kinetic escalation in terms of downgrading the diplomatic relations. It probably expected Iran to show some kind of remorse for an action that was irresponsible, in a manner of speaking. But since that did not happen, Pakistan exercised its right to strike a target, a non-Iranian target, as Iran itself has conceded, a target which essentially involved...
Okay, Ejaz, before you go too far, I just have to understand, if you think Iran is justified, then you asked why that, or you say Iran really had no reason or right to attack, but Iran has said that there are the militants from a Sunni separatist group that has attacked before, Ejaz Haider, the Army of Justice. They were there, and that was the specific target for Iranian security, that an attack on Iran was being planned. Does Pakistan not accept that?
Pakistan, in the last 2 months, 2.5 months, in fact, has lost about over 30 soldiers in Balochistan. And these are attacks by the Baloch terror groups. My point is not that Iran is not concerned about elements that are attacking Iranian security forces. They are, and as they should be. Similarly, we are also deeply concerned about attacks that come from the Iranian soil. But the issue is that the expectation is that Iran is not sponsoring these elements. Anyone who's familiar with the border knows that it is porous. It's extremely difficult for both sides, as a matter of fact, to unilaterally be able to control every single movement.
Okay.
And so there is movement from the Iranian side into Pakistan. There's movement from Pakistani side into Iran, which is precisely why there have been these attempts at the highest level of governments on both sides to essentially put together mechanisms of cooperation where intelligence can be shared and which can avoid precisely this kind of unilateral action.
Okay. Giorgio, let me ask you, though, quickly. Fouad, I will come back to you. I would like to get your response, too. But quickly, Giorgio, can you maybe explain to what extent, despite what they say on a diplomatic level to each other, to what extent do Iran and Pakistan believe that the other country is actually supporting, to any extent, what they see as terrorist elements beyond each other's or within each other's borders?
Well, I think from the Iranian side, as we know from what Iranian officials have said, they speak of Pakistan as a neighborly country, as a brotherly country. I don't think that the Islamic Republic's leadership believes that officials in Islamabad are sponsoring certain groups against Iran in order to weaken or harm Iran. I think it's more based on an Iranian view that the Pakistani state has not been able to eradicate certain separatist groups operating on the Pakistani side of the border. As far as what Pakistan thinks about Iran's government, if I may, I'll defer to my colleague in Lahore to shed light on the Pakistani government's view on that issue.
Okay, go ahead. Well, let me get Fouad, because also Fouad wanted you to respond to what you heard Ejaz Haider saying. Do go ahead.
You know, I agree with our colleague from Pakistan, but Ejaz is correct. The border is porous. There have been difficulties, terrorist attacks, both on Iranian army personnel and Pakistani army personnel. People are getting killed. The families are facing death. And Iran and Pakistan relations in terms of political and economic relations have been quite good. There are no border disputes in terms of border difficulties. The border has been settled for many centuries. Economically, both countries are working very hard. You know, just a few months ago, the power grid between Iran and Pakistan was linked, so Iran could help the other side with regard to electricity when it's necessary, and vice versa. And politically, you know, with as our guest in Pakistan said, there's a genocide going on in Palestine, which is quite concerning both to Iranian and Pakistani people and governments, and there is no need for any type of hostility among bordering countries like Iran and Pakistan, both Muslim, majority Muslim countries. The reason Iran attacked that site was because there was an imminent threat. This is what Iranian government officials have said, that this terrorist organization was just about to orchestrate another attack, and there was really no time to coordinate anything, so they had to stop the attack.
Okay. Ejaz, I mean, there you go. And if that is the case, if you believe Iran, then Pakistan really did not have to retaliate. But they did. So is there something else behind that choice to take such action by launching airstrikes on a neighbor? People are saying it's tit for tat, but others are saying it was a little more disproportionate. What do you think really what would have been the price, I should say, if Pakistan had not retaliated?
Let me put it in a perspective, and I think Professor can sort of describe the internal situation and factionalism and tensions within the Iranian system much better than I can. But one thing is very simple. I humbly disagree that there was no time to inform the Pakistani authorities. I think there's enough time. As a minor student of military strategy and security and intelligence, I can tell you that when you get this kind of intelligence, there are hotlines. As I said, there are mechanisms there, and one can always inform. As a matter of fact, if these people have been spotted on the Pakistani soil and they're going to travel and cross over into Iran, it's much better that Iran informs the Pakistani security forces, because they will be able to deal with them far more quickly than the Iranians can. That's one point. Second point is that for any state to actually launch an attack in another state without informing that state. Now, let's put it in a context. Just hours before this attack came, the Iranian foreign minister and Pakistan's caretaker prime minister had a meeting in Davos. Just a day before that, the Pakistan and Iranian navies had a day-long naval exercise in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I see no reason. As a matter of fact, in a way, if Iran was planning to do this, then this becomes, and you know, I wish I didn't have to use this word, but it kind of becomes perfidious, because that means that state X is planning to do something in state Y's territory, and you meeting with those officials, there's cooperation, and then suddenly you launch strikes. So for Pakistan, a response was important, not only to establish deterrence vis-a-vis Iran, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, establish deterrence vis-a-vis India. As you know, that the Indians have, on a couple of times in the last 3-4 years, have tried to aggress against Pakistan. The last round that we played with India in February 2019 was when we downed two of the planes, one which fell in Pakistan, the other which fell in the Indian territory, and you know, we captured one of their pilots, and then of course, you know how that panned out. So the point, and now India is again going into election mode, and last time it happened, India was going into an election mode. So we very
And Pakistan is going into election mode as well. We have to be honest. So let me sum up then with Giorgio. We're down to our last few minutes. I mean, it sounds like really everyone involved here needs to show some force at this point for a number of reasons, whether it's an election cycle or whatever else the political dynamics are. But overall, it seems everyone is relatively comfortable believing that this will not go any further, that Pakistan-Iranian relations will not be destabilized to a truly worrying extent.
Yeah, I definitely think that the leadership in Iran and the leadership in Pakistan both have the wisdom and the ability to see what is obvious, and that's that any sort of serious escalation, God forbid some war between these two countries, would be horrible from the standpoint of both Iran and Pakistan's interests. Both Iran and Pakistan have some very huge problems that they're dealing with right now. These problems would be greatly exacerbated if this tension spirals out of control. I also think it's important to take stock of China, a country that's very close to both Islamabad and Tehran. China would have a lot to lose from this tension spiraling out of control, and the Chinese definitely have much incentive to help the two sides contain this tension and to lower the temperatures. I think what we see from the diplomatic engagement between Pakistani and Iranian officials is that there's a real desire to prevent this from getting out of control. And I'm optimistic that the two sides are going to find a way to prevent this friction from escalating into a serious regional crisis. To be sure, such a crisis is the last thing that either Pakistan or Iran needs right now. Certainly hoping that Iran and its nuclear-armed neighbor do not find themselves in any sort of a horrible crisis. I think it can and it should be prevented.
And just quickly, Giorgio, in 30 seconds, I mean, what about Balochistan itself? Do you think there's any chance that the region itself can be pacified in a way, or is it going to remain restive and both powers will have to figure out a way to manage that space accordingly?
There are very serious sectarian, socioeconomic, and political tensions in this region. I do not think that these problems are likely to go away anytime soon. I hope that both the Iranian and Pakistani governments are able to address some of the underlying issues that have resulted in separatist groups and extremist groups finding fertile ground in this region. But no matter how Iran and Pakistan go about dealing with these issues, I hope that they can turn to diplomacy to resolve any of the underlying issues causing friction in bilateral ties.
Indeed. Okay, Giorgio, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.